My name is Edith Carter, and I'm 77 years old. I wasn't expecting a grand celebration or a red carpet. All I had looked forward to was dinner at my son's house, a simple meal, a seat at the table, and a few hours with the family I had spent a lifetime supporting. I had just finished adjusting the navy blue dress I wore on special occasions. It wasn't fancy, just neat, respectable. The kind of dress Marissa, my daughter-in-law, wouldn't roll her eyes at. I glanced at the clock. It was a little past 6. Dinner was supposed to begin at 7. Then my phone buzzed. I reached for my glasses, expecting a reminder from Garrett, or maybe a last-minute question about dessert. But instead, I saw the message. You weren't invited. My wife doesn't want you there. Just like that. 8 words, not a call, not a conversation, a text message. For a moment, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was sent to the wrong person. Maybe Garrett's phone had been hacked. But no, it was his number. It was his tone. I sat down slowly, the phone still in my hand. My heart wasn't just breaking, it was unraveling. So memories flashed in my mind. Garrett as a boy, clinging to my hand on his first day of school. Garrett at 12, crying when his dog passed away. Garrett introducing Marissa to me, full of excitement. And now Garrett, a grown man, telling me I wasn't welcome. I stared at the wall, not moving, not crying, just silent. That was the moment something inside me shifted. After all the years, after all the giving, maybe it was time to stop showing up for people who made it clear they didn't want me there. The house was quiet, too quiet. I stood up, walked over to my secretary desk, an old piece my mother had left me, and opened the drawer where I kept all the financial documents. Every folder was labeled, every receipt filed. I pulled out the thickest folder. It was labeled Garrett. Inside, there was a lifetime of giving. A $20,000 check to help him launch his business, one that folded in less than a year. Tuition receipts from when Marissa went back to school to earn her real estate license. Bank transfers for roof repairs, a down payment on their new SUV, the kitchen remodel Marissa just had to have. Each piece of paper told a story, not one of generosity but of expectation. My wallet had been their safety net. My name had been the invisible ink on every corner of that new house. 6 months ago, Garrett had called me to say they'd found the perfect home, a beautiful townhouse overlooking the river, part of an exclusive new development. He said it would be a place for the whole family. Mom, you'll have your own corner, he told me. That corner, apparently, didn't come with a chair at the dinner table. I looked down at the brochure, still sitting on my kitchen table. I had paid $120,000 toward the down payment. It wasn't a loan. It wasn't an investment. It was a gift, a mother's way of saying, I'm here. I care. And now it felt like I had bought myself out of their lives. I leaned back and whispered the question I hadn't dared ask for years: was this love or just a transaction? For the first time, I didn't rush to excuse them. I didn't defend their choices. I simply sat in the truth I had spent a lifetime giving. And they had gotten used to it. I didn't sleep that night. The text kept replaying in my mind, over and over, not invited. My wife doesn't want you there. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. I made myself a strong cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the stack of papers I had pulled from the drawer. Then I picked up the phone and called the bank. Good morning. Fayetteville Community Bank. How may I help you? My name is Edith Carter, I said clearly. I need to suspend all automatic payments from my accounts immediately. There was a pause on the line. All payments, ma'am? Yes, every single one. And I also need to revoke the power of attorney granted to my son, Garrett Carter. I could hear the woman on the other end typing. That's a significant change, Mrs. Carter. We'll need your signature for the full process, but I can begin the suspension now. That's what I want. Start today. The silence that followed was not awkward, it was powerful. I had supported my son, his wife, their lifestyle, their ambitions, and their obligations for over 2 decades. But that morning I remembered what James, my late husband, always said. Edith, love them, but don't let them walk on you. When the woman confirmed that all 174 automatic payments were now blocked, I thanked her, hung up the phone, and exhaled deeply. I hadn't realized how heavy it all had been. The years of small compromises, the quiet dismissals, the holidays spent alone while still footing the bills. That morning, I didn't just cancel payments. I reclaimed space in my own life. My phone buzzed again. Garrett. I didn't answer. Instead, I typed a simple message and stared at it for a long time. Time to pay your own way. Then I turned the phone off and turned a corner in my life. By the time Garrett showed up at my door, the kettle was already on the stove. He didn't knock politely. He rang the bell in that impatient, sharp way that said he wasn't here for a chat, he was here for control. I opened the door and he walked right in without waiting for an invitation. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, the worry in his eyes barely covering the irritation beneath. The mortgage bounced. Marissa's car payment didn't go through. The bank called about the suspended authorizations. "Did you cancel everything?" I nodded. "Yes, I did." He blinked. "All of it?" "All 174 transactions." Garrett sank into the living room chair like the wind had been knocked out of him. "Why?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just looked at him and said, "You uninvited me from your house, Garrett. The one I helped pay for. You sent a message saying your wife didn't want me there, and you didn't even try to stop her." "That was a mistake," he stammered. "Marissa was upset. I didn't mean it." "You didn't mean to say it, or you didn't mean for there to be consequences?" I asked quietly. He looked away. I poured 2 cups of tea, placing one in front of him. He didn't touch it. "We have bills, Mom," he said finally. "Loans, Toby's tuition, the house. You've always helped us." I did, I agreed. But that help became expected. And then it became invisible. Garrett opened his mouth to respond, but I raised my hand. "Tell me one thing you've done for me, Garrett," I asked, my voice soft but steady. "One thing you did not because you had to, but because you wanted to. One thing that didn't involve you needing something from me." He sat in silence. And in that silence, I found my answer. 2 days later, it was Toby who showed up. He looked disheveled, wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, and that nervous energy of someone who had never truly faced consequences. I let him in without saying much. He dropped onto the couch and rubbed his hands together. "Grandma, I need help," he began. "My credit card's been frozen. I can't pay my rent. My car's overdue. I'm in trouble." I sat across from him, calm and composed. "How much do you owe?" He hesitated. "About 7,000. "What did you spend it on?" He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Some stuff, a new phone, a trip with friends, a few parties." I nodded slowly. "You've been working for 2 years now, right? At the insurance company?" "Yeah." "So why haven't you learned to manage your money?" He looked like a child being scolded, not a 23-year-old man. "I guess I always thought I could ask Mom and Dad. Or you." "That's the problem," I said. "You've all gotten used to thinking I'd always be here to fix things. But I'm not your backup plan, Toby. I'm not your bank." He leaned forward, desperation creeping in. "Grandma, please. Just this once. I swear I'll pay you back." "No," I said firmly. "But I will offer you something else." He looked confused. "Like what?" "My lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, is looking for a part-time assistant. Feeling, answering phones. It won't solve everything, but it's honest work." Toby blinked. "You do that for me?" "I love you," I said, "but I'm done enabling you. My love is no longer measured in money." He sat quietly, unsure of what to say. For the first time, I didn't give in. And for the first time, he heard the word no, out of anger, but out of love. Real love doesn't always feel comfortable. Sometimes it sounds a lot like a boundary. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Rebecca showed up with a bag of groceries and a soft knock on the door. She didn't come for money. She didn't come to plead on anyone's behalf. She just came to check on me. "Grandma," she said as I let her in, "I saw Dad earlier. He looked lost. Mom's furious. Toby's sulking. The house is chaos." I didn't respond right away. We unpacked the groceries together. She chopped vegetables while I boiled pasta. After a while, she asked quietly, "Are you okay?" I looked at her, truly looked at her. Rebecca had always been different, quieter, more thoughtful. She never asked for much. She called on my birthday. She visited without a reason. She hugged me just a little longer. "I'm okay," I said. "For the first time in a very long time, I think I'm actually okay." She smiled. "Good, because I think you're doing the right thing." I raised an eyebrow. "You do?" She nodded. "I've seen how they use you, especially Mom. She's always dressed in the best, drives the best, dines at the best, and somehow it's always you footing the bill. It startled me to hear those words from someone so young. But she wasn't just a child anymore. She was a woman, and she saw clearly. "You've taken care of everyone for so long," Rebecca added. "It's time someone took care of you." We sat down for dinner, just the two of us. No tension, no manipulation, just a simple meal and honest conversation. Before she left, she hugged me tight. "I'll always be here for you, Grandma, not for your money. For you." I kissed her cheek. That's all I ever wanted. In a house that had echoed with demands and expectations, Rebecca's presence was the one thing that felt real. It reminded me what family should feel like: safe, sincere, and free. The next day, Garrett called again. "Mom, we need to talk, as a family." His voice was tight, rehearsed. I could hear Marissa in the background. "Tomorrow at 2, I said. "My house. No surprises." But of course there were surprises. At exactly 2:00, Garrett showed up first. He looked exhausted, shirt wrinkled, eyes puffy. "Mom," he said, "I wanted to talk to you before everyone else arrived." "Everyone else?" He hesitated. "Marissa, she invited a few people, her parents, her sister. They're concerned." I stepped to the window and froze. 3 cars had just pulled into my driveway. Out stepped Marissa in full glamour, followed by her parents, siblings, even a couple of their friends. I turned back to Garrett. "You brought an audience?" "She thinks he started," but I held up my hand. When the doorbell rang, I opened it slowly. Marissa stood there, flanked by her delegation. "Good afternoon, Edith," she said loudly, projecting her voice. "We're here to discuss this situation as a family." "This is my home," I said quietly. "Not a courtroom, not a boardroom, just my home. And I didn't invite any of them." Marissa blinked, clearly not expecting pushback. "You, Garrett, Toby, and Rebecca may come in. The rest can wait outside or leave." Marissa's smile faltered. She turned to her family. "Please wait in the cars. We won't be long." Reluctantly, they retreated. Once inside, I faced my son, my daughter-in-law, and my 2 grandchildren. "So," I said calmly, "who wants to tell me what this circus is really about?" Marissa launched into a speech. "Your financial decision affects all of us. My parents' retirement plans, Garrett's brother's situation, even Toby's future." I listened, arms crossed, and said nothing. When she finally paused for breath, I looked at her and asked, "And when did I become responsible for all of that?" No one answered. Because deep down they all knew the truth. They hadn't come to fix a relationship. They had come to salvage their lifestyle. The room was heavy with silence after my question. Garrett finally spoke, voice low. "Mom, we've come to rely on your help. You've always been there. We just didn't think you'd ever stop." I nodded. "Exactly. You didn't think, you just took." I turned to Toby. "How many times have you visited me just because you wanted to? Not because you needed money." He shifted in his seat. "And Marissa," I said, facing her, "tell me one single thing you've done for me without expectation." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "You see," I continued, "what hurts isn't just the money. It's the erasure. The way I disappeared from your hearts the moment I stopped paying." Marissa's mask slipped. Her voice hardened. "This is manipulation. You're trying to guilt us." "No," I said. "I'm telling you the truth. For once." She stood abruptly. "You'll regret this. When you're alone, when no one's there, you'll regret pushing us away." I didn't flinch. "Family isn't just a word we use when we want something," I said softly. "It's a choice we make every day with our actions, not our invoices." Garrett looked up, eyes glassy. "What do you want us to do, Mom? Apologize? Beg?" "No," I said. "I want you to grow up. I want you to stop confusing love with dependence. And I want you to leave." The words were calm, but they landed like thunder. Toby stood without protest. Marissa muttered something under her breath as she stormed out. Garrett lingered, unsure. "I'll be here," I told him. "If you ever want to talk, really talk, not about money, but about us." He nodded slowly and followed the others out the door. Only Rebecca stayed behind to hug me. "I'm proud of you, Grandma," she whispered. I didn't reply. I just held her close. Because for the first time in a long time, I had nothing to prove and nothing to give but the truth. 6 months passed. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't anyone's emergency contact, anyone's financial plan, anyone's silent sponsor. I was just Edith. I spent mornings on the porch, sipping coffee and reading books I'd long set aside. I took walks through the park where James and I used to stroll. I even signed up for an art class at the community center, something I'd always wanted but never dared prioritize. Rebecca visited often. She never asked for anything. She just came to talk, to laugh, to share her world with me. She was my only connection to the family now, and that was enough. As for Garrett and Marissa, the calls dwindled. After a few more attempts, some apologetic, some demanding they stopped altogether, I heard from Rebecca that they sold the house and moved to a smaller apartment. Marissa took on extra work. Garrett finally learned how to manage a budget. Toby, to my surprise, took the job with Mr. Whitaker. I ran into him once at the grocery store. He looked tired, but different, less entitled, more grounded. We exchanged a quiet hello. That was enough. And me? I went to Italy. It was James' dream, one we'd postponed too long. But Rebecca insisted I go. Do it for you, Grandma, she said. For once, just for you. So I did. Now I sit on a terrace in Tuscany, watching the sunset over rolling vineyards. Laureen, my oldest friend, laughs beside me as she scribbles notes in her travel journal. You look lighter, she says. I am, I reply. Because I finally laid down the weight of other people's expectations. And in doing so, I found the only thing I ever truly wanted. Peace. Not just the absence of noise, but the presence of self. The quiet strength of someone who no longer needs to be needed to feel whole. That evening, as twilight painted the Tuscan sky in gold and violet, my phone buzzed. Garrett's name lit up the screen. 6 months ago, I would have answered before the second ring, eager, hopeful, already rehearsing ways to fix whatever was wrong. But now I simply looked at the screen and let it fade to black. I didn't need to hear another promise. I didn't need to be pulled back into a cycle I'd finally stepped out of. Instead, I picked up my wine glass, raised it to the horizon, and whispered, to me. The version of me that had always come last. The version that stayed silent at dinner tables where I was unwelcome, who smiled through birthdays alone, who paid bills with shaking hands and called it love. She was gone now. In her place stood a woman who had learned that freedom doesn't come from letting go of people, it comes from letting go of permission. I don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace. I don't owe anyone my savings, my time, or my seat at a table I was never really welcome to. What I do owe at this stage in life is honesty with myself. Rebecca texted later that night, a photo of her new apartment and a simple message, Grandma, I can't wait for you to visit. I made you a room just yours, always. And with that, I smiled, because sometimes the legacy we leave behind isn't the money we gave or the house we built. It's the truth we finally spoke. And the boundary we were brave enough to draw. If this story spoke to your heart, share it. Because someone out there needs to hear, it's never too late to take your power back. And you're never too old to begin again.
My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 69 years old, and I never thought I would find myself standing in a courtroom fighting my own daughter-in-law. Yet there I was, clutching my phone like a lifeline as Amanda leaned toward me during the recess. Her lips, painted in perfect crimson, barely moved as she whispered, I'll leave you with nothing, old hag. I should have felt fear. Instead, I smiled, because what Amanda did not know was that I had a secret, one that could unravel every carefully spun lie she had thrown into this courtroom. Judge Harper sat on the bench, her glasses sliding down her nose, her eyes scanning us both with the calm of a woman who had seen too many families torn apart over money. Amanda's lawyer had painted me as manipulative, a bitter old woman who had convinced my son Daniel to rewrite his will. They spoke as if Daniel had not been a thoughtful man, as if he had been nothing more than clay in my hands. Amanda looked the part of a grieving widow. Black suit, hair tied neatly in a bun, a string of pearls around her neck. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue at just the right moments, sighing for the benefit of the jury. She was good, I will give her that. Years in corporate sales had trained her to sell anything, even lies. But here's what happens when you reach my age. You develop instincts sharper than most people realize. I had seen the cracks in her act months before Daniel died, and now, inside this courtroom, she had pushed me into a corner. The thing about corners is that sometimes they give you the perfect angle to strike back. I tightened my grip on my phone and waited for the judge to call us back to order. Amanda thought she had me where she wanted, but Amanda was about to learn that Daniel's mother was not so easily defeated. The night that changed everything began at exactly 2:03 in the morning. I remember because I was staring at the red glow of the alarm clock on my nightstand, wondering if the ache in my chest was indigestion or something far worse. At my age, you do not ignore those kinds of questions. Then the phone rang, splitting the silence of the house in half. "Mrs. Carter," a steady voice said, "this is Officer Miller with the state police. I am afraid I have some difficult news." My breath caught in my throat. Even before he said the words, some part of me already knew. "There has been an accident," he continued. "Your son, Daniel Carter, was killed instantly when a semi-truck ran a red light on Route 19. The human brain does funny things when it is confronted with devastation." I heard the words. I understood them, but another part of me, stubborn and protective, insisted there had been a mistake. Not Daniel. Not my boy who called every Sunday without fail, who never forgot my birthday, who still brought me flowers on Mother's Day. I drove to the hospital in a fog, the road stretching endlessly before me. When I arrived, Amanda was already there. Her makeup had smeared into perfect streaks, and she clutched Daniel's wedding ring in her fist as though it were some holy relic. She collapsed into my arms. "He is really gone, Evelyn," she sobbed. For a moment, all my suspicions faded. For a moment, she was just a woman broken by loss, and I held her because that is what Daniel would have wanted me to do. But grief is a strange companion. It can strip away masks or make them stronger. In the days that followed, Amanda's grief began to look different to me. Calculated. Performed. While friends brought casseroles and neighbors left flowers, Amanda was already making calls, already planning a funeral that Daniel himself would have hated. The midnight call had taken my son. But what I did not know yet was that it had also opened the door to a battle I never imagined fighting with the very woman who had just cried on my shoulder. The days leading up to Daniel's funeral were a blur of phone calls, arrangements, and endless visitors. People meant well, I suppose, but every sympathy card, every bouquet, every hushed whisper only deepened the hollow ache in my chest. Amanda, meanwhile, seemed to thrive on the attention. She wanted everything big: the mahogany casket that cost more than Daniel's first car, a string quartet for the service, white roses imported from out of state. She said it was all to honor her husband's memory, but I knew my son. Daniel would have rolled his eyes at such extravagance. He was practical, grounded, a man who believed that love mattered more than luxury. Still, Amanda insisted, "People need to remember him properly," she said, brushing me aside when I suggested something simpler. Her tone made it clear that her definition of properly was about image, not remembrance. The day of the funeral arrived cold and gray. I wore Daniel's favorite color, a deep navy dress with a simple brooch, while Amanda swept in like a queen in black silk and pearls. She cried at the right moments, smiled graciously at guests, and never once looked as though her grief caught her off guard. Watching her was like watching a performance, each move rehearsed. 2 weeks later, I sat in a quiet law office with Amanda at my side, waiting for the reading of Daniel's will. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already secured. After all, wasn't it natural for everything to go to the widow? The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began. "To my wife, Amanda Carter, I leave half of my life insurance policy and retirement accounts to support her future." Amanda gave a small nod, her lips pressed into a victorious smile. Then came the words that changed everything. "To my mother, Evelyn Carter, I leave the family home at 214 Brookside Lane, with the hope that she will find comfort there. I also leave the remaining half of my life insurance and investments to ensure her security." Amanda's smile faltered, her eyes widened in disbelief, and a flush crept up her neck. "That can't be right," she whispered, her voice sharp enough to cut. But it was right. Daniel had changed his will only weeks before his death. And in that moment, Amanda's mask of composure cracked, revealing the fury beneath. The battle lines were drawn, and I knew we were only at the beginning. The papers arrived on a Tuesday morning. I was in the garden watering Daniel's roses, the ones he had planted for me last spring, when a courier handed me a thick envelope. My hands shook as I opened it, but by the time I reached the second page, they were trembling for an entirely different reason. Amanda was suing me. The words leapt off the page like poison: undue influence, mental incapacity, fraudulent manipulation of a vulnerable individual. According to her lawsuit, I had coerced Daniel into rewriting his will during a moment of weakness, exploiting his recent health diagnosis to push her aside. I sat down on the garden bench, the sound of the water hose still running, soaking into the soil. The accusations were absurd. Daniel had been sharp as ever in his final months, handling his work, his finances, his friendships with the same clear mind he had always possessed. But Amanda's lawyer was clever. They knew they did not have to prove these claims beyond a reasonable doubt, just make them sound believable enough. That evening, my attorney, Richard Hall, sat across from me at the kitchen table. A family friend in his 70s with calm eyes and a steady voice, he had guided me through the estate after my husband's passing years earlier. "Evelyn," he said, his fingers resting on the documents, "their timing works against us. Daniel changed his will only 6 weeks before the accident. No history of sudden estate changes, no obvious disputes with Amanda. On paper, it looks suspicious." I wanted to argue, to shout that it was Amanda who looked suspicious, but I swallowed the words. The courtroom would not care about my gut instincts, they would care about evidence. Over the next weeks, Amanda and her attorney painted me as a manipulative mother who could not let go of her son, a woman desperate to secure financial security at any cost. Neighbors I had known for years were called to give statements, repeating harmless conversations I had once had about Amanda's spending habits, now twisted into accusations. The weight of it all pressed down on me. Grief had already drained my strength, and now the law was demanding more. Still, somewhere inside, a small flame burned steady. Amanda thought she could bury me under accusations, but she underestimated a mother's resolve. I had not raised Daniel to be weak, and I would not let her erase his final act of love. Just when I thought the walls were closing in, help came from the most unlikely source. 3 days after my deposition, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Tyler Green, the 16-year-old grandson of my neighbor, standing nervously on the porch with his phone in hand. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I think you need to see something." Tyler was a good kid, always tinkering with his drone despite the neighborhood association's constant complaints. He shifted from foot to foot, holding out the phone like it was burning his hands. On the screen was a grainy video, shot from above with the drone's night vision camera. My breath caught. The timestamp read 11:46 p.m. the night before Daniel's funeral. And there, in the backyard of what should have been a house of mourning, was Amanda. Her arms were wrapped around a man who was most definitely not my late son. Tyler's face turned red. I wasn't spying, honest, I was just flying around like I usually do. But when I checked the footage later, he trailed off, uncomfortable. "Do you know who that man is?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Tyler nodded. "Yeah, that's Mr. Rivera, Carlos Rivera. He works at the insurance office on Main Street. My mom gets her car insurance from him." Carlos Rivera. The name meant nothing to me at first, but a quick search later that evening revealed more than enough. Insurance agent, specialized in life policies, middle-aged, struggling financially. Exactly the kind of man who might find comfort in the arms of a widow, especially one with a large payout coming her way. As I replayed the video over and over, the pieces started to fall into place. Amanda's insistence on the lavish funeral, her confidence that she would inherit everything, her fury when she discovered the truth of the will. None of it was random. She hadn't just been grieving, she had been planning. I looked at Tyler, who was still fidgeting on my porch. "You've done something important here," I told him softly. "But you must not show this video to anyone else yet. Can you promise me that?" He nodded solemnly, and for the first time since Daniel's death, I felt a spark of hope. Amanda thought she had control of the story, but now, thanks to a boy with a drone, I finally had the beginning of the truth. That night I barely slept. I kept seeing the grainy drone footage in my mind, Amanda clinging to Carlos Rivera as though my son's death were nothing more than an inconvenience. By morning my grief had hardened into resolve. If Amanda wanted a war, then I would not sit idle. I began my own investigation, starting with something simple: our shared phone plan. Daniel had always been practical, and years ago he had added Amanda's number to our account to save money. As the account holder, I still had access to detailed billing records. It took hours of scrolling, but the pattern was unmistakable: regular calls and text messages between Amanda and Carlos stretching back 8 months, long before Daniel's accident. 8 months. Their affair had begun almost immediately after Daniel's diabetes diagnosis, right around the time he started talking about revising his will. Next, I looked into Carlos Rivera. Public records showed his insurance office was barely staying afloat. He had a mortgage that was underwater, a 10-year-old car, and 2 kids in college. In other words, a man in financial strain, one who might be drawn to a widow with access to a large life insurance payout. Then I found something chilling. 3 months before Daniel's accident, Amanda had increased his life insurance coverage. The original policy was $200,000. Amanda pushed for it to be raised to $800,000, 4 times the amount. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Amanda wasn't simply a grieving wife lashing out in court. She was a woman who had been preparing for widowhood, planning every detail down to the last signature. I gathered everything: phone records, insurance documents, timelines of Amanda's meetings with Carlos. I filled a folder with evidence, each page another piece of the puzzle Daniel must have sensed but never shared. When I handed the folder to my attorney, Richard Hall, his eyes widened. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "this isn't just a defense anymore. This is a case of fraud." For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt the weight on my chest ease just slightly. I wasn't powerless. I had proof, and I was ready to use it. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and polished floors the morning we returned for the preliminary hearing. Amanda sat across the room at the plaintiff's table, her posture perfect, her black suit tailored to perfection, her eyes downcast in a performance of grief. I recognized it for what it was: theater. Her attorney, Patricia Lane, opened with fiery words. She painted me as a controlling mother who could not let go, a woman so desperate for security that I had manipulated my sick son into rewriting his will. Every detail of my Sunday dinners with Daniel was twisted into evidence of coercion. Every comment I had ever made about Amanda's spending habits was recast as venom. I listened in silence, clutching my notes and reminding myself that truth has its own weight, heavier than lies. When Patricia finally sat down, Richard Hall rose slowly, adjusting his glasses. His voice was calm, steady, the exact opposite of Patricia's drama. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about manipulation. It is about the truth of Daniel Carter's choices." He presented Daniel's medical records first. Daniel's doctor testified that his diabetes was under control, that his mental clarity was never in question. Patricia tried to suggest that the diagnosis itself had caused undue stress, but the doctor was firm. Daniel was optimistic, pragmatic, and focused on his future. Then Richard introduced the estate lawyer who had overseen Daniel's will update. The man testified that Daniel had been calm, deliberate, and specific about his wishes. He even requested that the changes remain confidential, explaining that he wanted to protect his family from unnecessary tension. Amanda's face remained composed, but I saw the twitch of her jaw when Richard laid out the phone records next. He read aloud the dates and times of Amanda's calls to Carlos Rivera, hundreds of them, beginning months before Daniel's accident. Patricia immediately objected, claiming the calls were irrelevant. Judge Harper overruled her, allowing the records to remain as evidence. Amanda shifted uncomfortably, whispering furiously to her lawyer. The tide was turning. For weeks Amanda had controlled the narrative, but now the cracks in her facade were widening. I sat a little taller in my chair, my heart pounding not with fear but with anticipation, because I knew the strongest evidence had yet to come. The courtroom grew tense as Richard motioned for the technician to prepare the next piece of evidence. Amanda tilted her head, clearly unsure of what was coming. I tightened my grip on the armrest, knowing this was the moment everything would shift. "Your Honor," Richard said, "we would like to present a video recording taken the night before Daniel Carter's funeral." The lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered to life. Grainy footage filled the courtroom, night vision images from a drone. There was Amanda standing in the backyard, her arms wrapped tightly around Carlos Rivera. The timestamp read 11:46 p.m., less than 14 hours before the funeral service. The room fell silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Amanda's face went pale, her mouth opening as if to protest, then closing again. "That's not what it looks like," she blurted finally, her voice shrill. "Carlos was just comforting me." Judge Harper raised an eyebrow. "Comfort looks different to most people, Miss Carter." Richard did not waste a moment. He confirmed the video's authenticity, citing the drone metadata and Tyler Green, the teenager who had captured it. The judge nodded, unimpressed with Amanda's excuses. But Richard wasn't finished. He pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase, his expression solemn. "Your Honor, we also submit a handwritten letter from Daniel Carter, dated 2 days before his death." He began to read aloud. Daniel's words filled the courtroom, careful, steady, unmistakably his. He wrote of suspicions about Amanda, of evidence he had uncovered, of his decision to change his will to protect his mother. He explained how he reduced the insurance coverage and altered the beneficiary structure. By the time Richard finished, tears blurred my vision. Daniel had known. My son had spent his final days not in confusion, but in clarity. He had chosen to shield me from the storm Amanda was preparing. Amanda sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. The jury exchanged glances, the weight of the letter sinking in. For weeks Amanda had tried to paint me as manipulative, but now the truth stood in her place. Daniel himself had spoken from beyond the grave, and his voice carried more power than all her lies combined. The final day of the hearing dawned crisp and bright, though my heart was heavy as I entered the courthouse. I wore Daniel's favorite purple scarf pinned with my late husband's small silver tie clip. It was my way of carrying them both with me into battle. Amanda arrived looking like a shadow of herself. The polished widow's facade had cracked. Her black suit was wrinkled, her hair hastily tied back, and the circles under her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. She avoided my gaze as she slipped into her chair beside Patricia Lane. Judge Harper called the court to order. Richard presented Daniel's letter one final time, along with the handwriting expert's testimony confirming its authenticity. He reminded the court of Daniel's clarity of mind, his deliberate choices, and the undeniable evidence of Amanda's betrayal. Patricia attempted a closing argument, but it rang hollow. She claimed Daniel's words were written in paranoia, that grief and illness had clouded his judgment. The jury sat stone-faced, unmoved. After a short recess, Judge Harper returned with her decision. In the matter of Daniel Carter's estate, she declared, "I find no evidence of undue influence, incapacity, or fraud on the part of Evelyn Carter. The will dated 6 weeks before Mr. Carter's death is valid and will be upheld as written." Amanda's head dropped into her hands. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder in the chamber. But the judge wasn't finished. She leveled her gaze at Amanda. "Furthermore, given the evidence presented, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential investigation into insurance fraud and conspiracy. Miss Amanda Carter, you are advised to retain criminal counsel." Gasps rippled through the room. Amanda sat frozen, her carefully planned future crumbling before her. Patricia closed her briefcase without a word. 3 weeks later, Amanda was arrested. Carlos Rivera cooperated with investigators, his testimony confirming what we had already known. The woman who had tried to take everything from me ended up losing far more than she imagined. As for me, I walked out of that courthouse with Daniel's will intact, my dignity restored, and the weight of truth on my side. Justice had spoken, and this time it was in my favor. The house feels different now, quiet, steady, yet filled with Daniel's presence. His books still line the shelves, his garden still blooms with the roses he planted for me, and his laughter seems to echo in the walls whenever I sit alone at the kitchen table. Every Sunday I still make dinner for one. I keep Daniel's chair in its place, untouched, a reminder that love does not fade just because a life ends. There are evenings when grief sneaks in, but then I remember his letter, his words of protection, his careful planning. He gave me more than an inheritance, he gave me the assurance that I was never alone in his heart. Tyler still stops by sometimes with his drone, eager to show me the colors of a sunset or the flight of migrating birds. He probably doesn't fully grasp how much his video changed the course of my life. I make sure to thank him each time, and I hope he carries that lesson with him. The smallest actions can carry the greatest weight. Amanda may have tried to steal Daniel's legacy, but in the end she only exposed her own betrayal. What she intended for destruction became the foundation of my strength. If there is a lesson in all this, it is simple. Love and truth endure, even when lies roar the loudest. My son chose honesty even in the face of heartbreak, and his choice protected me when I could not protect myself. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs courage today, and leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from, I would love to know. And if you want more stories of quiet strength and justice, make sure to subscribe. My name is Marian Cole, and I still remember the moment I realized something was terribly wrong. For 2 weeks my son Aaron had not answered a single call. At first I told myself he was busy with work, but a mother knows when silence means more than just busyness. So one gray evening I boarded a bus to Cleveland and rode in silence, staring out the window with my stomach in knots. When I reached Aaron's townhouse, the winter wind cut through my coat. I walked up the familiar steps, knocked, and called his name. No answer. I tried the knob and felt my breath catch when the door gave way. Aaron never left his door unlocked, not with his little boy Leo inside. The living room looked like a storm had torn through it. A sofa shoved out of place, a broken coffee mug and shards across the floor, dark stains seeping into the carpet. My chest tightened as I stepped over the mess, whispering for my grandson. Upstairs, room after room stood empty. Finally, in Leo's bedroom, I froze. A scraping sound, faint but steady, rolled out from beneath the bed. My hands shook on the desk. I wanted to kneel, but my legs would not move. Instead, I whispered his name, voice breaking, and backed away to dial the police with trembling fingers. Red and blue lights washed across the front windows as 2 officers hurried inside. I led them upstairs, every step heavier than the last. My voice was barely a whisper as I pointed to Leo's bed. The younger officer crouched low, speaking firmly into the silence, asking if anyone was under there. No reply came. Then, with one sharp motion, they lifted the frame. Leo lay curled into himself, thin as a shadow. His hair was matted, his cheeks hollow, and in his small hands he clutched an empty plastic bottle as if it were his only lifeline. His wide eyes stared past us, vacant, unblinking. For a moment no one moved. The officers froze, I froze. The whole world seemed to stop. I wanted to gather him into my arms, but my hands shook so badly I was afraid to touch him. One officer gently lifted him, and I stumbled behind as they carried him out into the bitter night. The siren wailed as we sped through the city streets toward the hospital. I sat beside my grandson in the back seat, fanning his face with a scrap of paper, whispering through tears, "Grandma is here, Leo. You are safe now." My name is Marion Cole, and I am 61 years old. I live in a modest town just outside Cleveland, where the days pass quietly and the neighbors still wave when you drive by. For most of my life I worked as a librarian, the kind of job that rewards patience and a love of small details. Since my husband passed away, my son Aaron and my grandson Leo have been my closest family. Aaron called me at least once every week. Sometimes it was just a quick update about his job, other times it was about Leo's school projects, or the latest Lego set they were building together. No matter how busy life became, he always made time for those calls. That steady rhythm was our thread of connection, and I never took it for granted. So when the phone stayed silent for days, then weeks, I knew in my bones something was wrong. I tried to quiet my fears by telling myself he was busy, but a mother knows the difference. That is why I packed a bag, boarded a bus, and traveled the miles to his home unannounced. I had no idea that decision would uncover the darkest chapter of my life. The silence began as a faint worry, the kind you brush aside while making morning coffee. I called Aaron at the usual time, letting the phone ring until his voicemail clicked on. I left a simple message, "Son, are you doing all right? Call me when you can." Hours turned into days, and the message remained unheard. I tried again at dawn, at lunchtime, even late at night. Each time the same result, no answer. I sent short texts, words I hoped would draw him back. "I miss you. Please check in." Not one was delivered. I called his office and spoke with a coworker who hesitated before admitting, "I haven't seen Aaron all week." Another friend said he thought Aaron might be on vacation. Their voices carried more confusion than certainty, and my heart sank deeper. By the 10th day I was desperate. I reached out to neighbors near his townhouse. One older woman mentioned a stormy night when a light flickered on and off inside Aaron's home. She assumed it was Leo heading to bed, but even as she spoke, her voice trembled. That trembling echoed the fear already burning in my chest. At the hospital, the emergency team rushed Leo into a brightly lit room, their voices calm but urgent. I stood at the doorway, clutching my coat, afraid to breathe. They checked his pulse, placed an IV into his fragile arm, and whispered about dehydration and weight loss. Words like severe malnutrition and psychological trauma floated in the air, each one cutting deeper into me. When the doctor finally let me near him, I saw my grandson's eyes still wide open but fixed on some faraway place. I stroked his hand, whispering his name again and again, but he gave no sign he heard me. He held tightly to that empty bottle, the plastic crinkling under his grip as though it were the only anchor left in his world. That night I stayed beside his bed, listening to the soft beeping of machines and the uneven rhythm of his breathing. Nurses offered blankets and gentle words, but nothing reached the boy I once knew, the boy who used to laugh and chatter without end. I hummed an old lullaby I once sang to Aaron, hoping some part of Leo might remember. Still, he lay silent, locked in a place I could not reach, and my heart broke with every minute that passed. On the third evening at the hospital, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized from the precinct. My hands shook as I answered. "Mrs. Cole," the detective began, his voice grave. "We re-examined your son's house using luminol. It revealed a significant amount of blood in the living room." I felt the words echo inside my chest, dull and heavy. Blood. My lips tried to form a reply, but nothing came out. The detective paused, then added, "We are treating this as a possible homicide." My knees weakened, and I nearly dropped the phone. At that moment Leo stirred, his small hand tugging at my sleeve. His wide eyes filled with tears as if he had heard every word. And then, after days of silence, he broke down. "Dad, he's gone," he cried, his voice raw and trembling. The sound pierced through the sterile hospital room like a blade. I pulled him into my arms, rocking him gently as nurses hurried in, startled by his cries. I whispered, "No, Leo, it is not certain yet," but my own voice cracked with doubt. The detective's voice still echoed in my ear, steady but heavy. "We will need you to provide a statement, Mrs. Cole." I clutched Leo tighter, unable to let go. For the first time since I walked into that unlocked house, I realized the nightmare might be even darker than I feared. Long before that stormy night, there were signs of cracks forming in Aaron's marriage. I remember the first time he brought Sabrina home. She was bright, eager, and a little shy. She blushed when I asked about her cooking, laughed nervously when she tried to help me with the dishes. Back then I believed she would love my son for the rest of his life. For a while it seemed true. They married, and when Leo was born, the whole family felt wrapped in new light. But slowly, things changed. Sabrina developed a habit of gambling. At first it was just small bets, the kind she brushed off with a smile. Then came larger debts, phone calls at odd hours, and collectors knocking on their door. Aaron tried to cover for her. He sold the car he had saved for, the one he was so proud of, and handed over the money to keep trouble away. He came to me once, his eyes red, asking for help. I gave him my savings, telling myself it was only this one time. The shouting grew more frequent. I visited once and saw Leo pressed into a corner, tears running down his cheeks while Sabrina scolded him for spilling milk. Aaron stood nearby, helpless. It was then I realized he was drowning in a storm of his own. When the divorce finally came, I thought relief would follow. Aaron won custody, and for a short time, peace returned. But peace never lasts when old debts remain unpaid. The room was quiet except for the hum of medical machines when the detective asked Leo if he could share what he remembered. I held his hand, assuring him he was safe. After a long silence, his small voice finally broke through. "It was raining hard that night," he whispered, eyes locked on the blanket clutched to his chest. "I was building a Lego tower when the doorbell rang." It rang again and again. Dad went to the door and looked through the peephole. His face looked different, tight and worried. He turned to me and said, "Leo, get under your bed and do not come out until I say." I didn't understand, but he pushed me toward my room, pulled the comforter down low, and told me to stay quiet. Through a narrow gap I saw everything. Mom came in with a tall man I didn't know. She asked Dad where I was. He told her calmly I was with Grandma for winter break. She started yelling. She said he owed money, and if he didn't pay there would be trouble. Dad shook his head. He said she had already taken too much from him. The tall man stepped closer and shoved him. Dad stumbled but kept standing. Then came another shove, harder. I heard a crack as Dad's head hit the corner of the table. He fell and didn't move. Leo trembled as the words spilled out, his small fingers digging into my sleeve. I wanted to call him, to reach him, but I was too scared. I stayed hidden, listening to their voices fade, and then the sound of something heavy being dragged. Tears streamed down his face. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough Dad would wake up, but he never did. The next morning the detectives asked me to come to the precinct. In a small room with a map spread across the table, they showed me grainy security footage from a neighbor's camera. The video was shaky, the storm blurring the picture, but one detail stood clear: a dark pickup truck parked outside Aaron's townhouse on the night Leo described. Minutes later the same truck pulled away, something long and heavy covered with a tarp in the back. The detective explained that the license plate was unreadable, but the truck model matched vehicles often used by local loan collectors. My stomach tightened. I could almost hear the sound Leo described, the dragging, the muffled voices. It all began to fit together in a way I desperately wished it wouldn't. That same day a neighbor came forward. Mrs. Carson, an elderly woman across the street, admitted she had heard shouting and the crash of furniture during the storm but was too afraid to call the police. As she spoke, guilt trembled in her voice. I squeezed her hand and told her she was brave for speaking now. Her testimony, combined with the footage, gave investigators their first solid trail. For me, it was both hope and heartbreak in equal measure. Back at the hospital, while Leo rested, a memory surfaced that made my heart pound. Years earlier, Aaron had proudly shown me a folder. Inside was a life insurance policy he had taken out soon after Leo was born. He had said with that bright smile of his, "Mom, I want to make sure my family is secure no matter what." At the time it touched me deeply. I never thought that decision could later become a weapon. I told the detectives about it, and they returned to Aaron's townhouse to search his study. Hours later they handed me a copy of the very same policy. My breath caught as I read the lines. The sole beneficiary was Sabrina. After the divorce, Aaron never changed the document. Out of love and responsibility, he had unknowingly left an open door for her. The detective explained quietly that if Aaron were declared dead, Sabrina would inherit a large sum, more than enough to pay debts and walk away free. I sat back in the chair, staring at the paper until the letters blurred through my tears. Aaron had thought he was protecting his family, and instead he may have placed a target on his own back. 2 days later the detective called again, his tone heavy. "Miss Cole, we discovered an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, often used by loan collectors. We need you to come with us." My knees weakened as I agreed, leaving Leo in the care of a nurse he trusted. The drive felt endless, every passing mile pulling me closer to a truth I was not ready to face. Inside the warehouse the air was bitter cold, heavy with the smell of rust and chemicals. Officers led me to a separate building, the county morgue. There, under fluorescent lights, a white sheet lay across a gurney. When they pulled it back, my son's face appeared, pale and still. His thick brows, the line of his jaw, features I had kissed since his childhood, were unmistakable. I collapsed, whispering, "My son," over and over, my tears soaking the sleeve of my coat. The medical examiner spoke gently, explaining Aaron had died from a traumatic head injury on the very night of the storm. I barely heard his words. All I could see was the boy I raised, the man he became, lying silent before me. A piece of my heart was gone forever. Not long after the identification, the police tracked down the man who had been seen with Sabrina on the night of the storm. He was rough-looking, with a scar down his cheek and a worn leather jacket. At first he denied everything, claiming he hardly knew her. But when detectives laid the evidence in front of him, the blanket stained with Aaron's blood, the jacket belonging to Sabrina, his bravado crumbled. Faced with the possibility of a long sentence, he confessed. He admitted to helping Sabrina move Aaron's body from the townhouse to the truck. He described how she promised him money once the insurance came through. Finally, under pressure, he revealed where she was hiding: an abandoned house on the edge of the city, far from the main roads. I listened to the report from outside the interrogation room, clutching my shawl so tightly my knuckles turned white. The man's words confirmed what my heart had feared since the beginning. Sabrina had not only returned, she had orchestrated everything. And now, with her location known, there was no place left for her to run. The trial drew people from across the city. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing as Sabrina was led inside in handcuffs. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, holding Leo's small hand. His fingers trembled in mine, and I whispered, "We are here for your father. We will be strong together." The prosecutor began by laying out the timeline. He presented photographs of the living room marked with blood patterns, the blanket stained with Aaron's DNA, and the jacket belonging to Sabrina. He played the blurry video of the pickup truck idling in front of the townhouse on the stormy night. And then, he introduced Leo's recorded testimony. The sound of my grandson's fragile voice filled the courtroom, describing how his father hid him under the bed, how Sabrina and the tall man entered, and how Aaron fell after the shove. Many in the audience wiped away tears. Sabrina tried to hold her composure, but as the evidence stacked higher, her mask cracked. She suddenly stood and shouted, "I didn't mean to kill him. I only wanted the money." The room fell silent. Her accomplice, sitting beside his attorney, shot back, "You planned everything. You told me to push him." The judge struck the gavel to quiet the chaos, but the damage was done. Everyone could see the truth unraveling. Sabrina's greed and desperation had driven her to destroy the very family she once claimed to love. After days of testimony, the judge returned with the verdict. The courtroom grew silent as her clear voice filled the air. the defendant, Sabrina Ward, is found guilty of first-degree murder and insurance fraud. She is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her accomplice is found guilty of accessory to murder and concealment of evidence and is sentenced to 20 years in prison. The sound of the gavel echoed, and for a moment I could not breathe. My son would never come back, but justice had spoken. I looked down at Leo. He hid his face against my arm, shoulders shaking. I pulled him close, whispering that it was over, that his father could finally rest. My tears fell freely, not only for the loss but for the long fight that had finally reached its end. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, but I had nothing more to give. I held Leo's hand and walked away, each step heavy yet carrying a small measure of relief. The storm that had torn through our family left scars that would never fade, but at least the truth was no longer hidden in the shadows. In the weeks after the trial, I closed the door of Aaron's townhouse for the last time. I could not bear the silence of those rooms. Instead, I brought Leo home with me to my small town, where neighbors know each other's names, and the nights are quiet. It was not easy. He carried nightmares in his sleep and fear in his waking hours. But together, step by step, we began to rebuild. I enrolled him in therapy, where a gentle counselor taught him to use drawings and stories to release what words could not yet carry. At home I made simple routines, a chart on the fridge for meals and water, the same bedtime each night, the same phrase every morning, "Grandma is here, you are safe." Little by little he began to trust those patterns. I know the pain will never fully disappear, but I also know love can stitch together even the deepest wounds. If this story has touched you, share it, comment where you are listening from, and remember to hold close the people you love today.